Hi, I'm Nicola McKenzie, founder, mortgage and insurance advisor here at DM Mortgages. And in today's video, we'll be looking at how much deposit you need in order to buy a property. So to find out more, stay tuned. Now guys, before we go any further, make sure that if you've not already, you hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so that you don't miss any future video uploads from this channel. Now, this video is part of a whole series of videos that's dedicated to preparing to buy a property, specifically deposits. So make sure that you check out the rest of the videos in the playlist. Now, here at DM Mortgages, guys, we don't monetize this channel to give you the best viewing experience. So to show your support for this channel, when the time comes to look at your mortgage or remortgage options, then make sure that you head over to our website, which is dm.mortgage, and there you can book in for a free mortgage consultation with our fully qualified mortgage advice team. So how much deposit will you need to buy a property? Well, throughout this video, I'm going to do my best to give you an idea on what different factors may influence the size of deposit that's required. But ultimately, guys, you have to understand when you're buying a property, how much deposit you need is going to depend on your individual circumstances and which lender you apply to. Now, throughout this video, I'm going to make a few basic assumptions. I'm going to assume that you're not buying a property using any special scheme. So for example, the right to buy scheme. I'm also assuming that you're purchasing a residential property, not a buy-to-let. I'm also assuming that you're not using a guarantor, for example. Okay, so in that situation, you're purchasing a property or looking to purchase a residential home. Now, most lenders are going to want you to put down somewhere between a 5 and a 25% deposit in most cases. Okay, now how much you need to put down between 5 and 25% is largely, like I say, going to depend on your individual circumstances. Now guys, the one concept you have to bear in mind when it comes to how much deposit you need to put down is that the size of your deposit is going to be based on the risk that the lender is taking on, okay? Now, the lower risk that you as the buyer appear to be to the lender, so lower risk would be, you've got a good credit history and you've got permanent residency. The less risk a lender perceives you to be in terms of the likelihood of you paying that money back based on a variety of different factors, then the more risk that a lender is going to be willing to take, i.e. lending a higher percentage of the property's value, because the lower deposit you put down, the higher percentage of the property's value that the bank's going to have to lend to you, okay? So if you've only got a 5% deposit, that's okay, but generally speaking, you just have to bear in mind that that does involve the lender taking a higher risk. So lenders do tend to be fussier when accepting people with a 5% deposit, generally speaking. Now let's look and drill down at some of the factors that often influence how much deposit you might need to put down between generally 5 and 25%. Now, one of the factors that will influence how much deposit you'll need is your visa status, okay? Now, the way that lenders perceive it, again, I am generalizing here, guys. The one other point that you have to bear in mind is that every lender is going to have a very different criteria on how they treat these different scenarios. And that's why it's so important that when you've saved up at least a 5% deposit, that you check in with us and you get mortgage advice, because unless you've been a mortgage professional for many years, so you fully understand the lender's criteria, then it's going to be very difficult for you to know which bank is going to accept you based on your circumstances, okay? But let's look at residency or visa status. Now, the way that banks perceive it, generalizing here, is that if you've got permanent residency, permanent rights to reside, you're more likely to be in the country permanently. Okay, if you're here on a temporary visa, then a lender perceives that as more risk that you might not be in the country for the duration of the term that the mortgage is going to run, okay? So generally, lenders tend to be fussier in that scenario, and they might want to see a bigger deposit in those circumstances. Now, I've got a video specifically about mortgages for those that do not have permanent rights to reside, so I'd suggest that you check that video out. So what I'm not saying here, guys, guys, is that it's impossible to get a mortgage if you haven't got permanent rights to reside and you've got a 5% deposit. That's not what I'm saying. It is possible, but it's just that the options are much more limited, and it's going to depend on the remaining factors in your circumstances, okay? Now, another influencing factor as to how much deposit you need is going to be your credit history and your credit score. This is probably the biggest influencing factor, actually. Now, lenders, like I say, if you're only putting down a 5% deposit, and you've got a poor credit history, you've had CCJs, defaults, maybe you've had bankruptcy in the last 6 years, you know, a lender is going to perceive you as a higher risk, okay? So putting down a 5% deposit, generally those options are going to be for applicants that do have a good credit score, okay? Now, again, I'm generalizing here. There are some banks, very limited, but there are some banks that will, with a 5% deposit, consider those that have had CCJs in the last 6 years or a default, for example. But the options are very, very limited. So it's likely that if you do have a colourful credit history, if that's what we want to call it, that you might be required, you likely will be required to put down more than a 5% deposit. Now, another factor that will influence how much deposit you need is how much you want to borrow. Now, some banks will increase the amount of money that they are willing to lend if you have a bigger deposit. So not all banks will do this, but there are a fair few, like I say, that will be more generous in how much they're willing to lend for those that have a bigger deposit. Again, because if you've got a bigger deposit, you're seen as lower risk. So that's also something to bear in mind. Another factor that can influence how much deposit you need is your employment status. So again, guys, this isn't all lenders in all scenarios. If you're self-employed, for example, there are some lenders that will allow you to put down a 5% deposit, but there are some out there that would want you to put down a higher deposit. Again, it just varies depending on the banks, but that is another factor to bear in mind. As a viewer of this channel, I assume that you're considering purchasing a property in the near future. So it's important for you to know that DM Mortgages are an award-winning team of fully qualified mortgage brokers that provide advice to clients all over the UK. Now, we spend countless hours making free content for YouTube and other social media platforms to help to give you guys sound and useful information to make sure that you're in the best position to make informed decisions. To support this channel, when the time comes for you to consider your mortgage options, we want you to book a free online mortgage appointment with a member of our fully qualified mortgage advice team. Because without your help and support, keeping this channel going simply isn't possible. Now, we searched thousands of mortgage products from high street and specialist lenders to find the right deal for your circumstances. And we also provide a free will writing service to every DM client. So head over to dm.mortgage and book in for a free mortgage appointment when the time comes. And also make sure that you subscribe to this channel if you find the content useful. But for now, let's get back to the video. Now, another influencing factor generally as to how much deposit you might need to put down is the type of property you're buying. So houses generally are considered lower risk compared to flats because the capital growth associated with houses is generally greater when you compare them to flats. So for that reason, a bank sees houses as slightly lower risk. So in that scenario, again, this isn't all banks. There are some banks that will allow you to get a mortgage with a 5% deposit if you're buying a flat, but there are a lot of banks that simply will say no. And there are a couple of high street banks actually that I can think of right here, right now, that you could have the best credit score in the world, you could have the most stable employment history, but you need a 15% deposit to buy a flat with those particular lenders. So again, guys, this isn't me saying that you should be put off if you're buying a flat and you've only got a 5% deposit. What I am saying is that you need to make sure you've got specialist advice from us so that we can make sure that you're being placed with the right lender. Now, another factor as to how much deposit you might need is the lender that you apply to. So there are some banks out there that just simply don't offer mortgages for those with a 5% deposit. So again, that's where you need to ensure that you lean on us as the professionals to make sure that we're navigating you through and placing your application with the best lender for your situation. Now, as well, guys, what I've tried to do here is just give you some of the common factors that can influence how much deposit you might need to put down. Like I say, it would be impossible for me to give you an exact figure as to how much deposit you as an individual need, because it's all so specific and bespoke to your individual situation. So if you're at a stage where you've got a 5% deposit or more than that, then my advice would be that you need to check in and book an appointment with us, because what we can do is assess your situation and then work out what the minimum deposit size is for you as an individual. You might only need that 5%, you might need a little bit more. Generally speaking, the more deposit you put down, the lower rates of interest that a bank will offer you, because again, banks will reward you for being a lower risk applicant, okay? So the bigger the deposit, the lower the rates are, generally speaking. Now, another point to just bear in mind is that, again, the bigger the size of your deposit, like I said earlier on, the more lenders will be willing to offer you a mortgage. And that's even those that have got the best credit history, the most stable employment history, etc. The other thing as well is that there will be more products available to you simply by having a bigger deposit. And I just want to take a moment now to show you what I mean. So I've just logged into my live mortgage rate system. This system has thousands of products. Now, if I was looking to purchase a property as of today, of course it changes day by day, but as of today, there are 157 different products available for somebody buying a property with a 5% deposit, okay? Now, if I just change this search and I put in, keep everything the same, but simply just put in that I've got a 75% deposit, that then opens up a total of 1,909 different products, okay? So you can see what I mean now when I explained earlier on that if you've got, a particularly colourful credit history, for example, or you're buying a particularly quirky style of property, the bigger the deposit is going to likely mean that you're more likely to be able to obtain a mortgage, because there are more products and more banks that would be willing to offer to you, okay? And that just goes, generally speaking, in actual fact, even for those with the best credit score, as I said. So I hope that just helps to put things into context a little bit more. So I hope that video has been somewhat useful in helping you guys to give you a bit more of an idea as to how much deposit you might need and the kind of factors that can influence how much a bank might be expected from you in terms of a deposit. Make sure that you check out the rest of the videos in the playlist. Like I said, I've got a whole playlist of videos dedicated to property deposits and helping you to prepare to buy a property. Make sure that if the time is right for you to look at your mortgage or remortgage options, that you head over to our website, which is dm.mortgage, book in for a free of charge consultation. And of course, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell if you haven't already, so that you can stay up to date with all of the latest property, mortgage and finance news. And that's everything for today. I'll see you in the next video.